Okay, if we move on to the next slide and the next section, I'm going to briefly talk about return on investment and take you through a couple of broad approaches. The basics, social media programs, as they have progressed somewhat over the last 2 to 3 years in particular, really now have to justify their existence. Obviously with the recession as well over the last couple of years, budgets have perhaps become tighter, certainly in smaller corporates. And a social media strategy is never free. That's one of the main things to realise. There are free tools available, but larger enterprise grade tools will have a monetary cost. There will always be staffing costs, especially if you are trying to engage with a brand or a product that has a large body of conversation out there. And purely in terms of staff time, there is a large associated cost with actually engaging in a large conversation. However, if we examine the broad ROI discussion, of which there is a vast amount online, obviously, we can see there are two basic approaches. Okay, the first is fundamentalist, and this is concerned with the fundamentals of a business, the hard line of profit and loss and dollar return for investment made. All of these fundamental approaches utilise hard metrics, looking at the cost of staff time inputted into one side of a profit and loss equation, and then looking at the monetary value recouped from those efforts. These approaches and this way of examining return on investment works best if you are integrating your social media efforts into an overall something like a social CRM system like Salesforce or like another internal enterprise system where you can actually track customers and consumers across various platforms with a unique identifier. If you can tell that a customer rang in with a product issue 2 weeks prior to tweeting about that issue, that kind of integration is very much where the market has been headed now for at least the past 18 months, if not longer. The most influential proponent of this, if you want to have a little bit of further reading, is Olivier Blanchard. He's the brand builder on Twitter, and he is an excellent proponent of the hard approach to return on investment. The next approach, if we move on the next slide, is fluffy. And this is more concerned with the qualitative aspects of social media. I think the illustration, what I've tried to get at there, is the tendency of a lot of, particularly American PR firms, perhaps, to have lots of lovely videos where they work through lots of different equations, talking about return on engagement, return on conversation, and other slightly arguably nebulous sort of equations. There is a little bit of a harder, a little bit of a softer link between these forms of action and output and actual hard financial return. The fundamentalists, if you like, see it as a stage in between initial action, engagement and conversation, and then the financial return. So it is whether you stress the latter or the former of those last two stages puts you into one of these two camps. But the actual metrics you're talking about here are both things from the online analytics clickstream, your hits, click-throughs, conversion rates, and also brand awareness metrics, which stem more from the traditional media monitoring and PR realms. Okay, well that gives you a broad introduction to two of the main methods and approaches to measuring ROI. If we just move on to the next slide, then we can kind of move on to a little bit of a roundup. Business outcomes are really key to actually effectively measuring the return on investment from a social media monitoring campaign. It is about tracking wherever and if at all possible the hard returns of sales, leads and prospects. However, these hard metrics, which are invaluable, don't necessarily apply to every campaign. If we move on to the next slide here, we should always have bespoke measures for each client. There is no universal fit for each company and for each campaign. I think as we touched upon in some of the workshops, there are no 100% certified experts in measuring either social media generally or return on investment specifically, and it is very much up to individual brands, corporates and agencies to come up with a set of measures for each of their individual campaigns. If we look at the hard metrics, you can see that there are issues with, for example, public sector clients who don't necessarily have fiscal targets and fiscal outcomes which they are aiming towards. Charities as well, they'll be in a similar position to the public sector, arguably. And also brand awareness measurements. Certain PR firms, for example, it is their stated objective actually just to build brand awareness, and that isn't necessarily a hard financial measure. Okay, if you just move on to the next slide. A couple of other little points. It is worth bearing in mind that some social media campaigns, their entire point is to actually almost prove a negative. This is the job of PR agencies in the social media world, is to protect their brand from marauding conversations. How do you prove that in a hard fiscal return on investment sense? If a PR agency has engaged an influential blogger and stopped that blogger from sharing a negative story, or has perhaps preempted a huge disaster, perhaps by enabling a product recall, can that really and should that really be factored into a hard ROI measurement equation? I think that's highly debatable. And also, for putting my statistical hat on, there are lots and lots of confounding variables in some of the statistical approaches taken to ROI measurement. You will see a lot of graphs if you approach this debate online that simply argue you should baseline before a social media program starts, and then look at, for example, the level of sales after a social media program starts. However, if you look at it with a really solid statistical approach, you always have to bear in mind other fluctuations in the market, whether you're running other advertising campaigns that are offline, and also even things just like consumer attitudes, the seasons. All of these other variables have to be included in a proper ROI measurement. Okay, if we move on to the next slide, just to wrap up, just some of the conclusions. In the next slide, we can see some do's and don'ts. So, do tie social media engagement back to CRM and business processes if at all possible. Do measure business outcomes if you do have them, and do make up your own mind. Do not expect social media to be free. Even if you're using a free tool, there will always be an implication in terms of staff time and the money that equates to. And finally, don't be afraid to call BS, as they say in the States. Okay, thank you.